time. Today's passage of Scripture comes from the book of James, chapter 1, verses 19 through 27. You must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves, and on going away, immediately forget what they were like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be a blessing in their doing. If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, the religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God, the Father, is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Well, good morning. It's great to be back in worship with you all. It wasn't planned, but I missed out on the Sunday where you guys all graciously recognized the clergy. And one of the cool things I found out about when I got back is had no idea that you guys were going to be writing these kind notes. And so I have to admit, it was kind of nice coming back from vacation and received all these very gracious, wonderful words from you all. And I know Matthew, Kevin, Kelly appreciate those kind words you've given them as well. So on behalf of all of them, I just want to say thank you to you all for your love and your care for each one of us and our families. So a couple of weeks ago, I was on vacation, and this was my view for our first day when we got there. It was our time to go back to the ocean, and so we took a trip. We planned it. We flew down to San Antonio and then drove down to Padre Island, Corpus Christi area, and spent a few days at the beach, and then we came back to San Antonio for a few days. But as you can tell probably from looking at the picture, it may or may not have been a very windy day in the Gulf of Mexico that day. And it may or may not have been a red flag day on that first day of the beach when we got down there. And my family may or may not have disregarded said warning that says, hey, if you are not from the Texas area and do not know these beaches, if you are born landlocked inland, you really probably should not be out in this surf and weather. But my family's all home, safe and sound. We spent some time in Corpus Christi, and I just remember that first day after we spent the beach and got back to the hotel. We got the kids settled into bed, and Beth and I started talking about the day and just kind of some of the family vacations we've taken our kids on in the past. And I remember mentioning to her that very first night, after spending less than 12 full hours in Texas, being like, you know what, I already came to kind of the perspective, and I told her, I really like the rhythm of the ocean and the waves better off the Pacific coast down by San Diego, where we've taken the boys in the past, than I do here at the Gulf. Because here at the Gulf, it's just kind of just constant, no rhythm to the ocean here in this Gulf of Mexico. And that was the perspective I gained all in 12 hours. You see, today we're starting a new series, and today's message title is It's All a Matter of Perspective, because we're looking at the book of James for November. And what's interesting is the book of James has had kind of a shady history in the church, because there are some Christians who have not really thought a whole lot about this book of James. You see, Martin Luther, one of the first leaders and fathers of the Protestant movement in the church, which would eventually lead to the disciples of Christ, he thought the book of James was an epistle of straw. It was very flimsy. It wasn't worth anything in building a foundation for a person who wanted to grow in his or her faith. And so it should really just kind of be ignored. He didn't even understand why this book was in the Bible. Another Christian theologian who was reflecting on the New Testament said that of all the books in the New Testament, the epistle of James is the least Christian. So now some of you guys are probably wondering, okay, Seth, if this is the endorsement this book is getting, why did the team select this book to spend a month to reflect on here in November? My hope is by the end of today that maybe we will look at James in a new light, but for me personally, this book has had some impacts in my life growing up because you see, statistically speaking, I did not really become a Christian when they say, because there's all these statistics out there, whether they're true or not, I'm not sure how much I believe anymore. But there was a statistic that said that, if they don't embrace Jesus by the time they're out of middle school even, before high school, then most likely they'll never accept Jesus in their life. And I didn't really attend my first church camp or church youth gathering until after my junior year of high school. And so I kind of came to faith a little late, according to statistically, but I was still there, and I wanted to make up for lost time. And so as soon as I started making this commitment to Christ in between my junior and senior high school, I started looking for how do I live that out? How do I take that and make it impact my life and my journey? And so I started getting involved in these weekly Bible studies, and I went into college and got together with this group of young adults, and some of them were way better about reading their Bible than I was because they'd read it daily, and some in this group, they were trying to memorize the whole book of James, which I was like, yeah, that's not happening anytime soon. If that's what it means to be a good Christian, I'm out. But we came to these passages, and I just remember sitting there, hearing them talk about James in this passage about this is what it means to be unstained by the world, and that you got to be unstained and you got to be separate from the world, because really what I was hearing from this perspective is that the world is kind of seen in a negative light, and that you need to let go of the world if you're really going to embrace Christianity and follow Jesus. And so for a while I did this. I started checking off the boxes. I filled my CD binder with all these Christian music bands, which most are no longer in existence. And I started going, like I said, to these weekly Bible studies, and I started wearing these t-shirts with scripture passages on them because, lo and behold, this is what it was taught to me meant you were being a good Christian in a certain perspective. I still remember the conversation when a pastor came up to me after all the senior class portraits for our class of 2000 were posted in the local newspaper because, it was a millennial year and somehow we were special because we were graduating in 2000. But I remember him coming up to me and he said, I absolutely loved your senior class picture. And honestly, I didn't know how to take that. It kind of weirded me out at first. I'm like, okay, what makes my picture so special? I got 169 other classmates. And so I asked him, I'm like, okay, why did you love my senior class picture? And he said, because you took a step out for your faith and you wore around your neck a necklace with a cross on it. So you were letting everyone know that you were being a good Christian. And I was like, all right, that's all it takes? Cool. And so this was the path I found myself on, and for a while it worked, but then I got into seminary, and I started to begin to struggle with all that. And let me just say, when you go into seminary, when you're taking out loans for going and looking at being a clergy member, that's the wrong time to have a crisis of faith. But I got into seminary, and I was just really struggling with all these perspectives and perceptions of what faith and what it meant to be a good Christian was. Because you see, after Beth and I got married, we went down to Haiti. And I've never forgotten that experience that we spent some time in Haiti working at this orphanage / school / church. And we were listening to the people who had dedicated their lives and were spending their time in Haiti trying to help these communities out. And so they lived down there. And I remember one night as we were sitting around reflecting on the day, and they were sharing stories about why it was kind of a challenge for them to get Christians to support what they were doing. And I thought that was so weird. And I asked, why wouldn't they want to help kids who are struggling, who are malnourished? That just seems like a no-brainer. And they said part of the reason they had this struggle is because, you see, in Haiti, it's still very common to practice voodoo. Voodoo is still very much practiced there. You can hear the drums at night in certain communities, in the villages and whatnot. And because voodoo is not a faith towards God, and because voodoo sometimes was seen as possibly devil worship, a lot of Christians had no desire to then help this group out that was trying to help in Haiti, which, as crazy as it is, it's one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere, and yet it's literally only a 45-minute airplane ride to get there from Miami. You know, about the time it takes to get to Chiefs Arrowhead Stadium on a busy packed day. Had to work Chiefs in somehow, right? And so I sat there and I struggled with that, and honestly, it wasn't until recently I came across this quote, but it fit so much what I was feeling in seminary when I wasn't sure that I really wanted to do this anymore, and I was really trying to figure out, how do I tell Beth, my spouse and partner in life, hey, I know I started this master program, but I really don't want to go this route. And I was trying to figure this out, but I found this quote, and it just matched so much what I was feeling in this moment. It's from Richard Rohr. He writes, "We need to look at Jesus until we can look out at the world with his kind of eyes. The world no longer trusts Christians who love Jesus but not seem to love anything else." And that's exactly how I was feeling, because I was being told that to be a good Christian, all I had to do was wear a cross around my neck. It didn't matter if I was a world-class jerk the next moment, if I wore the right shirts, if I was listening to the music, if I wasn't attending watching R-rated movies, then that is what it meant to be a good Christian. And it didn't matter what else I did, and it just wasn't working for me anymore. I couldn't read these passages like this one found in James about being unstained from the world and think this is what it meant to be separated, to be different from the world. And so I had a couple choices. Like I said, I seriously thought about, I'd started writing out my thoughts of how to tell Beth I didn't really want to do this anymore, and I began to wrestle with it more, and then I began to look at these passages in James and other places where supposedly there was this perception that we weren't, as Christians, to be a part of the world around us. And I don't know, maybe it was divine inspiration that night, but I was looking at this James, and it's just one of those that stuck out to me. Because I realized, I feel like we read these passages like here in James, and perhaps we separate things out because we want to see it just the way we view it. Because here's the interesting theme I find about in this book of James. You see, I've been taught to be unstained by the world means to do these few things, don't listen to type of music, blah, blah, blah. But what no one ever wanted to make a connection to is that phrase was part of a bigger sentence in James. You see, we don't know in the book of James exactly when it's written because it's only 5 short chapters, and James wasn't big on sharing a whole lot of stories, so it's really kind of hard to peg exactly when this community and this letter was being written. Some think it was early as 60, which would only put it about 30 years after Jesus' life and ministry, and would actually make it one of the earliest documents we have about this Christian church and community. Some peg it later, around 90. Either way, James was working with a community that was in flux. They were trying to figure out, what does it mean now to follow Jesus, that he's gone, that he's lived, he's died, he's resurrected? What does it mean now, possibly, to follow Jesus now that the temple has been destroyed by Romans? And here's what James had to say. Because you see, the phrase that got left out from the Unstained by the World is James told them that pure religion is this: to take care of widows and orphans in their distress. And notice what James didn't say in that statement as he connects it with what it means to be unstained by the world. He didn't say, just take care of the widows and orphans that are part of our community, that are part of the Jewish Christian group. He didn't say, just take care of the orphans and the widows that are Gentile believers in faith. James made the universal statement that if a widow or an orphan is in distress, then we should be there. We should be engaged. We should be involved, because this is what religion looks like. As I started to think about that more, I started thinking about, then what did James mean by that next phrase, to be unstained by the world? You see, I don't think it has anything to do about necessarily creating barriers from being engaged in the world as a Christian. I think it has more to do that maybe there's certain ways that the world looks at people that we shouldn't adopt and engage in our own lives. After all, to be a widow and orphan in James's time basically meant you are on the outside looking in. Because they didn't have banks, they didn't have credit cards. Cash was only in coins because, dollar bills in that day and age, when an empire takes over another empire, would just burn up really fast. And so really how land and status and everything was transacted was through kinship. It's who you belong to. It's whose name that was your last name and what town that you grew and born with. And so when we're talking about widows and orphans, James is highlighting these are the people that are being left on the outside looking in. These are the people that the world has said they're the losers. And maybe they just need to be left out in the cold and take care of the winners. You say, maybe that's what James is really talking about by being unstained by the world. Maybe James is trying to tell us that being unstained by the world means we shouldn't decide the value of a person by the color of the skin, by what community they grow up in, by what country they're born into. Maybe we need to let go of all that and fully live out this idea that every single person is made in the image of God, regardless of where or who or what they practice in their own country. And so I think the real question for us today is, what does it mean to be a people of faith in a time when the church is in flux? Because it doesn't take long. You can fire up any internet browser, and it's really easy to find an article talking about how the church in North America is dying. And so I think right now, in many ways, we are journeying the same route that James's community, trying to figure out what does it mean to be a people of faith in the world. And just maybe it looks a little scandalous like this image from a football game a few weeks ago. If you can't see too well, that is George W. Bush, president, and that is Ellen DeGeneres. And did anybody else hear about this story? Okay, yeah. So this image went viral because people were totally at a loss of how these two people could be sitting in the same room, let alone sitting enjoying each other's company at a football game. And it got to be such an uproar that Ellen felt like she finally needed to respond to this controversy. And so she wrote this letter out and talking about, you know what? We shouldn't just be practicing kindness to those who believe the same thing we do. That we can be friends with people that don't necessarily think and act the same way we do. I think maybe this is what James is trying to invite us to think about on our own perceptions and perspectives. As we come to close today, I want to bring us back to that time on the ocean. You see, it took me all of 12 hours to form my perspective. Hey, you know what? I really prefer the California beach. And yet it wasn't 2 days later, both of our boys decided, rather than go do the dolphin cruise, they asked mom and dad, hey, can we just go back to that first beach we went to? We just had such a great time, and they want to go back there. And, mom and dad, we're trying to be all like, okay, we understand, acting a little disappointed, you don't want to see this. Though inside we're like, woohoo, there's saved some money in our wallet. Yeah. But we went back to the beach that afternoon, and we ended up staying there until well after sunset because it ended up being just the absolute perfect day. And I noticed my original perception and perspective was wrong. You see, it really had nothing to do with that was the Gulf of Mexico and somehow that ocean was a different rhythm from the Pacific. It had everything to do about how much the wind was blowing that first day that erased any type of rhythm to listen to or to relax to from the ocean. So I just want to ask you, when's the last time you slowed down? When's the last time you considered your perspectives and your perceptions? Because maybe you're here this morning and you're where I was back in seminary. Not really sure what I believe about this whole faith thing anymore. And I just want to encourage you that maybe those doubts are there because that's exactly what God's inviting you to consider. Because maybe God has a larger picture in mind if we take the time to be still, to hear each other out,